I remember that day so clearly. The office felt colder than usual, and the air seemed heavy with tension. I had been 9 months pregnant, waddling around the office, juggling the last few tasks I could manage. My baby was kicking constantly, reminding me that soon life would change forever. But I never expected the change would come in the way it did. When I stepped into my office, I saw a crisp envelope lying on my desk. It wasn't just any envelope. It had my name on it, written in Mia's neat handwriting. My heart sank before I even opened it. I knew something was wrong. I tore it open, and my eyes scanned the words that made my stomach twist. I was being fired. My own company, my own office, my own career, erased in a single sentence. I felt frozen. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I looked around, half expecting someone to say it was a joke, but the office was quiet, and everyone avoided my gaze. Daniel walked in at that moment, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a faint, unreadable smirk. "Olivia," he said, "it's for the best. You'll understand soon enough." I wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and demand how he could betray me like this while I was carrying our child. But I couldn't. The words caught in my throat, replaced by shock and disbelief. I sank into my chair, holding my belly, and tried to steady my breathing. How could this happen? How could the man I trusted with everything, my heart, my life, my work, turn on me in such a cruel, calculated way? For 5 years, we had built everything together. I had sacrificed so much to keep our company running, handling finances, ensuring clients were happy, making late-night calls while Daniel focused on his meetings. And yet, it seemed like none of it mattered. Mia, the secretary, who always smiled sweetly and seemed harmless, had been working behind the scenes. I didn't notice at first, but now it was obvious. She had been preparing this for months, quietly undermining my work, whispering to clients, and perhaps even planting doubts in Daniel's mind. And Daniel had gone along with it, pretending everything was fine while orchestrating this betrayal. Tears blurred my vision. I felt a wave of helplessness, a mix of anger and sorrow, crashing over me. I wanted to shout, to beg, to make him see the pain he had caused, but I knew it wouldn't help. He had already made his choice, and I was left with nothing but my growing belly and the echo of his betrayal. I left the office that day, my arms wrapped protectively around myself, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I walked out into the parking lot, sunlight glaring down on me, and realized just how alone I was. The man I loved, the man I thought I could trust with everything, had abandoned me emotionally, professionally, and morally. And as I drove home in silence, I made a promise to myself and my unborn child. I would survive this. I would rise above the humiliation and betrayal. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. No one would ever take my life or my dignity from me again without paying a price. As my pregnancy progressed, I started noticing small changes in Daniel. He no longer called me during the day like he used to. Dinner plans were canceled without explanation, and he often came home late, claiming work meetings. At first, I told myself it was stress, that our business was growing and he had to focus. I tried to be understanding, even excited for our baby, but there was a heaviness in the air I couldn't ignore. Then there was Mia. She had always been polite and helpful, but lately, her behavior felt off. I began seeing her whisper to other employees in corners, giving me quick glances that seemed almost mocking. Files would be moved, my meetings would be rescheduled without notice, and I often found my calendar altered when I returned from prenatal appointments. It was subtle, but it left me uneasy. Something about her calm, smiling face didn't match the tension I felt growing around her presence. One afternoon, I decided to confront Daniel directly. I asked him if he had noticed Mia's strange behavior and why meetings kept disappearing from my schedule. He chuckled lightly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Olivia, you're being emotional because of the pregnancy. Relax, everything is fine. Don't read too much into it." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Even when he reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mia was more than just an employee. I caught her on more than one occasion lingering near Daniel's office, waiting for him to leave, and then slipping into his office with a folder I had never seen before. My instincts screamed that something was happening behind my back. She wasn't just doing her job. She was watching, waiting, manipulating situations, and I was beginning to understand that Daniel trusted her completely. Every time I raised concerns, Daniel dismissed them, telling me I was imagining things. But the tension in the office was growing, and the staff began avoiding my questions about Mia's actions. I started feeling isolated, unsure of who I could trust. It was a slow, suffocating realization that the person I thought was loyal, the man I trusted with my life, was giving power to someone else to undermine me. I spent sleepless nights thinking about what could happen next. My mind kept replaying little moments, Mia's smirks, the whispers, the changes in my schedule, connecting the dots that I hadn't wanted to see before. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about office politics or stress. This was a deliberate plan, and I was right in the middle of it without even realizing it. It was the first time I truly felt the sting of betrayal. The man I loved and the woman I trusted as an assistant were slowly building a wedge between me and everything I had worked for. I didn't know what their endgame was yet, but I knew my life, my work, and my family were in danger. And deep down, I also knew I had to stay strong, not just for myself, but for the baby I carried. That morning started like any other, but the moment I opened my office door, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, on my desk, lay a neatly folded letter. I picked it up, expecting some routine memo, but my eyes widened as I read the words. I was being let go due to performance decline. My hands trembled, and I looked up immediately. Mia was standing there, her usual polite smile replaced by something smug, almost triumphant. And beside her was Daniel, quiet, his face unreadable. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. It felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. I reminded Daniel that I co-owned the company, that I had put years of my life into building it alongside him. His eyes met mine, and instead of concern or guilt, I saw a smirk. He leaned back casually and said, "The shares were legally transferred months ago. There's nothing you can do." My heart stopped. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Months ago? While I had been attending prenatal appointments, while I had been trusting him with everything, he had used that time to erase me from the company I had helped build from scratch. I stared at the papers on my desk, looking for any sign that this was a mistake. But the signatures were there, perfectly forged, perfectly legal looking. I felt my chest tighten. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was deliberate and cold. Every late night Daniel spent at the office, every excuse about stress or business growth, had been part of his plan. And Mia had been his accomplice every step of the way. Anger and shock collided inside me. I wanted to scream, to grab him, to make him understand the depth of what he had done. But I couldn't. My voice failed me. The pain was overwhelming. Not just the loss of my position or my work, but the realization that the man I loved had been planning this betrayal for me. He had taken advantage of my trust, my pregnancy, and my focus on our family to strike when I was most vulnerable. Mia, standing there, didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. Her presence was a constant reminder of how carefully this had been orchestrated. Daniel had not only removed me from the company, he had humiliated me in front of the staff, proving that he held all the power and I had none. I felt completely alone, surrounded by people who had once looked to me for leadership, now silently watching the collapse of my career. As I held the letter in my hands, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let this betrayal define me. I would not let Daniel and Mia win. I was pregnant, vulnerable, and yet stronger than they realized. This was not the end. It was a turning point. One day, they would face the consequences of what they had done, and I would make sure of it. I left the office that day with tears streaming down my face, but also with a spark of determination. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they hadn't. Not yet. I left that office feeling completely shattered. Every step I took toward the parking lot felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. My hands rested on my belly, and I tried to soothe the tiny life growing inside me, but the fear and sadness were overwhelming. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, seemed to have vanished in a single morning. Back at home, reality hit even harder. My savings were frozen, leaving me struggling to pay bills, and even buy groceries. The company I had poured my heart into no longer had my name on any document. Staff and clients who had once respected me now avoided me, influenced by the rumors Daniel had spread, saying I was unstable and emotional because of my pregnancy. I had no one to turn to, no shoulder to cry on. As the days passed, the isolation became unbearable. I spent most of my time in my small apartment, rocking myself and talking to my unborn son, promising him that he would never suffer like I was suffering. Nights were the hardest. The apartment felt cold and empty, and the quiet made my mind race with memories of betrayal. I wondered how someone I loved so much could hurt me so deeply, and I felt powerless to stop it. When Ethan was born, it was a quiet, lonely experience. Daniel was absent, of course, and no one from the company cared to check on me. Holding him for the first time, I felt a mixture of overwhelming love and a fierce determination. This tiny human depended on me, and I couldn't let him grow up in a world where people like Daniel could destroy lives without consequence. Food was scarce, money tight, and every day was a battle just to survive. I relied on a small network of friends who offered kind words, but no one could undo the damage Daniel and Mia had caused. Yet, in the midst of all this, I found a strange clarity. My life had been taken from me, yes, but my spirit hadn't been broken, not entirely. I realized that surviving this was not just about getting through each day. It was about preparing for the moment I would reclaim what was mine. I spent long hours planning quietly, thinking about how I could fight back without risking Ethan or myself. Every time I looked at him, I promised that one day, justice would be served. I told him, even though he was too small to understand, that no one could take our dignity away, and that he would grow up seeing his mother rise stronger than anyone expected. In those dark, lonely months, I learned resilience. I learned patience. And I learned that even when everything seems lost, the bond between a mother and her child could give you the strength to survive anything. Rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new fight, and I was ready to start. I didn't plan revenge. I planned justice. After months of slowly picking myself up, I finally called someone I trusted from my past. Lucas, a law school friend who'd become an attorney in the FBI's white-collar crimes unit. I didn't go to him with anger or threats. I went with questions and a folder of old company papers I had managed to keep. When we met, I handed him the documents and explained everything in the clearest way I could. I showed him account statements, emails, and the so-called transfer papers that had removed my name. Lucas listened without interrupting. He flipped through pages, making little notes, and then asked for time to check things against public records and legal signatures. I left his office that day feeling equal parts terrified and relieved. Finally, someone was looking at this with professional eye. A few days later, Lucas called. He was quiet at first, then blunt. He told me the signature on the transfer papers did not match the official notary record. It wasn't a small mistake. It was a forgery. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I'd gone from being a wounded woman to someone who held evidence that could expose a crime. Lucas didn't stop there. He dug deeper and found irregularities in the company's billing. Certain client invoices had been paid to shell accounts, and the amounts didn't add up with the work performed. There were duplicate invoices, altered dates, and payments routed through a third-party vendor that no one could properly identify. He traced several transactions back to accounts controlled by people close to Daniel and, disturbingly, to an account linked to Mia. Hearing the words embezzlement and fraud out loud made my chest tight, but it also lit a steady fire inside me. I remember sitting in my tiny kitchen, the papers spread around me like pieces of a map. For the first time since everything was taken, those pieces fitted together. The betrayal stopped feeling like a chaotic blow and started to look like a pattern I could use. The helplessness turned into a plan. Collect proof, document every inconsistency, and hand it to people who knew how to act. Lucas offered to help with the legal side and to advise on how the FBI could proceed without exposing me too early. We moved slowly and carefully. Lucas taught me how to preserve emails, how to copy bank statements without alerting anyone, and what to say when I spoke to former clients. He warned me about confronting Daniel directly. That would ruin the case and possibly put me at risk. So instead of yelling or pleading, I became methodical. I called old vendors, asked precise questions, and made notes. I kept my tone neutral. I collected facts. Each new discovery strengthened me. Every forged signature and suspicious payment was proof they hadn't just betrayed me personally, they had broken the law. That truth steadied me in a way anger never could. The spark of revenge I felt before turned into a steady purpose. To set things right, to make sure the betrayal had consequences, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. I knew I had to be careful. Daniel and Mia were clever, and any wrong move could ruin everything I had been working toward. So I started quietly gathering evidence. I went to suppliers and accountants, making it seem like I was just checking old files or verifying payments. I smiled, asked polite questions, and took notes. No one suspected that I was looking for inconsistencies, fake invoices, and signs of fraud. Clients were the hardest part. Some were surprised to see me, others wary. I explained I was reviewing records for personal reasons, careful not to hint at what I really knew. Every meeting, every phone call, every piece of paper I collected became part of the bigger picture. Slowly, I started to see just how deep Daniel's embezzlement went. It wasn't just a few missing dollars. It was systematic, clever, and deliberate. Lucas guided me through every step. He helped me organize the information, making copies and scanning documents to submit anonymously. He explained which things would catch the FBI's attention and which details were unnecessary. I felt like I was learning a new skill, how to fight someone who had once had all the power over me without being noticed. Meanwhile, I had to maintain a public image that was completely different from my private mission. I sent Daniel polite messages about Ethan, small updates about his growth, first words, little milestones. I never let him see that I was watching him, analyzing him, and collecting evidence. He probably thought I was broken, that the months of betrayal and hardship had destroyed me. In reality, I was quietly preparing to turn everything around. There were nights when I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, files, and notes, exhausted but focused. I thought about how carefully they had planned to remove me from my life. and it fueled me. Every fraudulent invoice I documented, every forged signature I uncovered, reminded me that I had the upper hand in a way Daniel would never expect. Even though I felt lonely at times, I reminded myself that I wasn't alone. Lucas was on my side, guiding me legally and professionally. And Ethan, my little boy, gave me strength. He was my reason to continue, my reminder that I had to do this not just for myself, but for the life we deserved. After weeks of careful work, the evidence was strong enough for Lucas to submit it to the FBI anonymously. I knew the investigation had begun. Daniel had no idea that the law was now quietly watching his every move. And I continued my act, smiling, polite, and seemingly defeated. But inside, I was growing stronger every day. I was no longer the person they could push around. For the first time since everything began, I felt hope. Hope that justice could come, that the betrayal would have consequences, and that one day, I would be able to walk back into that office not as a victim, but as someone who had taken back control of her life. When Daniel called and asked me to come to his office to discuss child support, I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. I knew this could be a dangerous situation if I went unprepared. Lucas had advised me to take precautions, so I agreed, but I didn't go alone. I followed his instructions carefully and wore a wire to record everything he said. Walking into his office, I acted calm and polite, just as I had for weeks. Daniel didn't suspect a thing. He greeted me with that same false charm he always had, unaware that I was no longer the vulnerable woman he had tried to destroy. I sat down, careful to remain composed, and listened as he steered the conversation toward money and child support. I nodded politely, pretending to be concerned and anxious, keeping my tone soft and non-threatening. Then, as if giving me a gift, he began boasting. He laughed, casually mentioning how he had played the system, how easy it had been to forge documents, push me out of the company, and make it seem like everything was legal. He even chuckled about how Mia had helped him cover everything up, how the clients had no idea, and how clever he had been to take advantage of my pregnancy. Each word he spoke sent a shiver down my spine, but also strengthened my resolve. This arrogance, this false sense of security, was exactly what Lucas and I had been waiting for. Every boast, every laugh, was evidence, proof that I could use to finally hold him accountable. I stayed calm, asked a few polite questions, and acted genuinely worried, all while the wire captured every incriminating word. After what felt like hours, I stood up and thanked him for his time. He waved me off with a smirk, still confident that I had no power, no evidence, and no way to fight back. I left the office with my heart racing, but inside, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The trap had worked exactly as planned. The next day, Lucas contacted me. He had already listened to the recording and confirmed it was perfect. Every admission, every laugh, every detail of the fraud was there in clear audio. He forwarded the recording to the FBI's fraud division, ensuring that Daniel's own words were now part of the official case. What he thought was just another casual conversation had become the strongest proof against him. For the first time, I felt that sense of control I had been missing for months. The man who had ruined my life, humiliated me, and tried to destroy my future had no idea that he had walked straight into a trap. I had turned fear and betrayal into power, and I was finally ready to see justice take its course. From that moment, everything changed. I was no longer hiding or pretending. I had evidence, I had the law on my side, and I had a plan. Daniel's arrogance had been his greatest mistake, and I was prepared to make sure he paid for it. 3 months had passed since that terrible day when I was thrown out of my own company. I had spent that time rebuilding myself, gathering evidence, and working with Lucas and the FBI. Now, I was ready to walk back into that office, not as a victim, but as someone who had the upper hand. My heart was steady, my head held high, and I wore confidence like armor. I arrived early in the morning. The sun reflected off the glass walls of the building, and everything looked the same, yet completely different to me. I wasn't the scared, betrayed woman who had fled months ago. Behind me were 2 FBI agents, sharp in their suits, silent but alert. I knew every step I took would be watched, but I also knew that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't powerless. As I entered, Mia was at the reception desk. The moment she saw the agents' badges, her confident, smug expression faltered. Her eyes widened, and she looked as though she might faint. I kept walking past her, my gaze fixed on the office, feeling the weight of justice settling in the air around me. Within minutes, the agents made their way into Daniel's office. I could hear his voice, confused and rising in panic as they announced who they were and what they were there for. And then I saw him, Daniel. He froze when he saw me standing behind the agents, his face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and finally, dawning realization. "You did this?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I looked at him calmly. My chest rose and fell steadily, my voice soft but firm. "No," I said. "You did this to yourself." It was surreal to watch. The man who had once controlled every aspect of my life, who had lied, cheated, and humiliated me, was now powerless. His plans, his arrogance, his betrayal, all of it had led to this moment. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and I could see him sinking in his chair, the weight of his choices finally pressing down on him. Mia's face remained pale as she realized she couldn't escape either. Every false smile, every whispered lie, every small act of deceit had come back to haunt her. Justice, slow but inevitable, had arrived. I stood there quietly, holding Ethan's hand. For the first time in months, I felt the tension in my chest ease. I didn't need to say anything more. Daniel's fear and Mia's shock were. The building that had been the site of my humiliation had become the stage for justice. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in months. This wasn't just revenge, it was closure. I had endured betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but I had also survived, planned carefully, and ensured that the people who had tried to destroy me were held accountable. For the first time, I realized that reclaiming control over my life didn't require anger or violence. It required patience, planning, and the courage to act when the moment was right. And that's exactly what I had done. The weeks after Daniel and Mia were arrested felt surreal. The investigation uncovered layers of theft, fraud, and forgery that had been hidden for years. Each document, each bank transfer, and each falsified record painted a clear picture of how carefully they had planned to take everything from me. It wasn't just about the company, it was about my life, my reputation, and my trust. Mia tried to save herself by pointing fingers at Daniel, claiming he had forced her to do everything. She begged for a deal, hoping to reduce her sentence. But her own bank records told a different story. Every payment traced back to her personal accounts, every invoice she had processed. There was no way for her to escape responsibility. The truth was undeniable, and the law didn't let her get away. As the court proceedings went on, I finally felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. Sitting there with Ethan in my arms, I realized that all the fear, all the tears, all the nights spent worrying and planning had led to this moment. The judge confirmed their guilt, and both Daniel and Mia faced prison time for their crimes. It was justice, but it felt deeper than that. It was a restoration of what had been taken from me. Most importantly, the court restored my ownership of the company. The shares that had been stolen from me were returned, my name reinstated, and my reputation cleared. Walking into the office again, now as the rightful owner, I felt a sense of peace and empowerment that I hadn't felt before. Everything Daniel had tried to take from me, my career, my dignity, my sense of self, was finally back in my hands. It wasn't just about revenge. I had learned that revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't heal the wound. Justice, on the other hand, restores balance. It shows that actions have consequences, and that those who betray trust cannot escape accountability. Standing there in that courtroom, watching the truth unfold, I finally understood what true closure felt like. Ethan, my son, had been my constant motivation through all of this. Holding him in my arms, I realized that everything I had done wasn't just for me. It was for him too, to show him that even in the face of betrayal, you can rise, fight back carefully, and reclaim what is rightfully yours. I wanted him to grow up seeing that integrity and perseverance mattered more than fear or anger. Leaving the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. The chapter of my life filled with lies, betrayal, and humiliation was closing, and a new one was beginning, one where I was in control, strong, and free. The company, my reputation, and my sense of self were restored, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. Justice had been served, but more than that, my dignity had been reclaimed. And that feeling, of standing tall after being broken, was more powerful than I could have ever imagined. Months after the courtroom ordeal, I took the first steps toward rebuilding my life completely on my own terms. I reopened the company under a new name, Ethan and Company Logistics, naming it after my son, who had been my anchor through the darkest time. I wanted the company to reflect the values I believed in: honesty, respect, and hard work. Everything Daniel and Mia had tried to destroy. I carefully chose a new team, hiring people I could trust, who shared my vision for a business built on integrity. Gone were the secretive behaviors, hidden agendas, and whispered betrayals. Every employee knew from day one that transparency and accountability were not just expectations, but the foundation of our culture. Slowly, the office filled with energy, dedication, and positivity. It was the kind of environment I had always dreamed of running, but now I had learned to truly appreciate what it meant to lead with trust. Some days, memories of Daniel's betrayal still crossed my mind. I remembered the humiliation, the late nights spent worrying about money, and the endless sense of helplessness. At first, it hurt to think about, but I refused to let those moments define me. Each memory reminded me of how far I had come and how much stronger I had become. What had once broken me became a lesson, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can be turned into sources of strength. Running the company now was different in every way. I was not only rebuilding financially, but emotionally as well. I set boundaries I had never set before, learned to trust my instincts more, and understood the value of patience and strategy. Every decision I made carried the weight of experience and hard-earned wisdom. I no longer feared being manipulated or overpowered, because I knew exactly what was at stake and what I was capable of handling. Ethan continued to be my inspiration. Watching him grow, hearing his laughter, and seeing his curiosity reminded me daily why I had fought so hard. Every achievement in the company, every positive step forward, I celebrated with him in mind. He was a living reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and perseverance can prevail. I also learned that the true measure of success wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming my life with dignity. Standing tall, running a company the right way, and creating a safe, honest workplace was far more powerful than any punishment I could have inflicted on Daniel or Mia. They had underestimated me, just as they had underestimated the strength a mother carries when protecting her child. Now, when I look at my life, I see resilience, courage, and growth. I am no longer the person who walked out of that office broken and scared. I am someone who faced betrayal, endured hardship, and emerged stronger than ever. And I finally understand the truth. When you've been destroyed by those you loved, the greatest victory, the truest revenge, is to rise higher than they ever imagined, unshaken and unstoppable.